Have you ever witnessed a moment where everything you thought you knew flipped upside down in an instant? Well, stay with me until the end because this story will leave you stunned, and before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Threads of Kindness, because stories like this one prove how truth can shatter lies in the most powerful ways. The night was quiet in a small southern town when Monica Carter, a graceful black woman in her late 30s, was driving home from a late dinner with friends. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair pinned back neatly, and her calm demeanor reflected the discipline of someone who had faced far bigger challenges than traffic stops. Yet as the flashing red and blue lights lit up her rearview mirror, Monica already knew what was about to happen. It wasn't the first time she had been profiled. Two white officers, Officer Reynolds and Officer Clark, approached her vehicle with the heavy steps of men who believed they already had authority on their side. "License and registration," Reynolds barked, shining his flashlight straight into her eyes. Monica's steady hands passed him the documents, but Clark circled the car, tapping the trunk like he was checking for hidden guilt. "Where you coming from this late?" Reynolds asked, his tone sharp, like an accusation instead of a question. "Dinner with friends," Monica replied evenly, her voice calm, her eyes unflinching. But the officers weren't interested in answers, they were building a case. "Step out of the car," Clark ordered, placing his hand on his belt, too close to his holster. Monica hesitated, not out of fear, but because she already saw the script they were following. "Am I being detained?" she asked, her voice steady. The question, simple yet bold, seemed to ignite something in them. Within moments, they claimed suspicion of drugs, called for backup, and placed Monica in handcuffs beside her car under the harsh glow of the streetlight. She didn't resist, didn't argue. She knew better than anyone that silence was sometimes the sharpest weapon. What the officers didn't know was that Monica Carter was no ordinary woman. Behind her elegant smile and polite composure was a career built in the shadows of national security. Monica wasn't just a civilian, she was an undercover CIA agent with years of training in counterintelligence, interrogation, and covert operations. These officers had no idea they had just thrown chains on someone who could dismantle their entire narrative with one phone call. Yet Monica didn't reach for her badge, didn't reveal her truth. She wanted to see how far they would go. At the station, she was questioned for hours, accused of crimes that were fabricated on the spot. They claimed her calmness was suspicious, that her confidence made her dangerous. They thought they had cornered her, but every question they asked, every lie they scribbled in their reports, Monica memorized. She sat still, her mind working like a recorder, cataloging every word, every unlawful action. Because Monica wasn't just preparing to defend herself, she was preparing to expose them. The moment the paperwork was filed, the trap was no longer hers, it was theirs. They had handed her every tool she needed to bring their corruption to light. And what happened when her true identity was revealed later in court would shake the entire room to its core, leaving everyone speechless. This was no longer just about a wrongful arrest, it was about power, justice, and the dangerous assumptions people make when they think they're above the law. And trust me, you're not going to want to miss how this unfolds. So before we continue into the next chapter of this explosive story, make sure you hit that subscribe button to Threads of Kindness right now, because what comes next will leave your jaw on the floor. The next morning, sunlight poured through the narrow window of the holding cell where Monica sat on the cold bench, her back straight, her eyes unshaken. The officers who had dragged her in the night before strutted around the precinct, their voices carrying smug pride as if they had achieved something heroic. Reynolds bragged about how he finally caught one of them, while Clark mocked Monica's silence, claiming it was proof she was guilty. But inside that cell, Monica's mind was far from broken, she was quietly assembling every piece of the puzzle that would soon tear their lies apart. She thought about the years of training at Langley, the endless drills where agents were taught to endure pressure, stay calm under false accusations, and never let enemies see fear. She remembered her instructors saying, "Sometimes the most powerful weapon is not your gun or your badge, it's your silence until the right moment comes." That moment wasn't here yet, but Monica knew it was coming. Later that day, she was escorted into an interrogation room, a windowless square with a buzzing fluorescent light that flickered every few seconds. Reynolds sat across from her, slamming a thick file onto the metal table. Though Monica instantly recognized it as theater, the file was thin, filled with nothing more than blank forms and hastily scribbled lies. Clark leaned against the wall, arms folded, smirking like a predator waiting for weakness. "We know what you were doing last night," Reynolds said, pushing the file toward her. We got word you've been moving with the wrong crowd, dealing in substances that don't belong in this town. Monica raised an eyebrow, her expression one of amused disbelief. She could have ended it right there, flashed her CIA credentials, demanded her immediate release, but no, she let them spin their web tighter. Do you have proof? She asked calmly, her voice low, her eyes piercing. That question seemed to irritate Reynolds, who leaned closer and hissed, "We don't need proof when people like you always slip up." People like you. The words rang in the air like poison, dripping with prejudice. Monica's jaw tightened, but she didn't react. Instead, she let them dig deeper, their arrogance blinding them to the fact that every word was being recorded by the precinct cameras, footage she knew her contacts in the agency could pull when the time came. Hours passed, and finally, they grew tired of the game. "We're charging you," Clark declared, his voice filled with false triumph. Monica only nodded, her mind already 10 steps ahead. That evening, she was brought before a judge to set bail. The courtroom was small, filled with whispers of onlookers curious about the criminal who had been paraded in handcuffs. Monica walked in gracefully, her dress from last night still neatly pressed despite the ordeal, her chin lifted high, her composure unbroken. She noticed the officers grinning in the corner, convinced they had won. But when the judge asked Monica if she had legal representation, she simply said, "Yes, Your Honor. My attorney will arrive shortly." 10 minutes later, the heavy doors swung open and in walked a tall man in a crisp navy suit, Jonathan Hale, one of the CIA's top legal advisors. The shift in the room was immediate. The office's smirks faded, their laughter died. Jonathan gave Monica a small nod, the kind that said, "Hold steady, it's almost time." As he approached the bench, he whispered something to the judge, and suddenly the air thickened with tension. The judge adjusted his glasses, looked at Monica with newfound seriousness, and announced, "Bail is set at 0. Ms. Carter is free to go until further hearing." The officers protested loudly, shouting about the evidence they had, but Jonathan calmly requested that all reports, body cam footage, and station recordings be preserved for the upcoming trial. Monica walked out of that courtroom free, her head high, but she knew this was just the beginning. What had happened to her wasn't just personal, it was systemic. She was determined not just to clear her own name but to use this moment to expose the corruption festering inside those who wore a badge as a weapon. And though she had walked out quietly, the storm she was preparing to unleash would shake the walls of that very courtroom. The truth was loading, and when it exploded, no one, especially Reynolds and Clark, would be ready for it. The day of the trial arrived faster than anyone expected, and the small-town courthouse was packed with reporters, townspeople, and activists who had caught wind of the case. The headline in the local paper screamed about a black woman caught in drug suspicion, and the officers strutted into the courtroom as if they had already won, their uniforms ironed crisp, their eyes full of arrogance. Monica, however, walked in differently, calm, poised, and glowing with the quiet confidence of someone who knew the truth was her sharpest weapon. She wore a tailored black suit, her hair sleek, her face serene, her very presence commanding respect. Sitting beside her was Jonathan Hale, the CIA's legal bulldog, his briefcase filled with files that could dismantle the entire case in seconds. The judge called order, the jury settled, and the prosecution opened with venom. Reynolds took the stand, spinning a fabricated story about how Monica had been acting suspicious, how she refused to cooperate, and how they had reasonable grounds to detain her. Clark followed with even more lies, swearing they smelled substances in her car, that she resisted, that she was a danger to the community. The crowd shifted uneasily, some nodded in agreement, others frowned, sensing the prejudice beneath their words. But Monica sat still, her hands folded neatly on the table, her eyes never leaving the officers as they lied under oath. Finally, it was Jonathan's turn. He rose slowly, adjusting his tie, his voice calm but razor-sharp. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today you will hear the difference between a fabricated story and undeniable truth. The defense will show you evidence that these officers not only abused their authority but also violated the constitutional rights of Ms. Carter in ways that will leave you questioning how safe justice truly is in this town." With a signal, he introduced the first piece of evidence, the precinct surveillance footage. The courtroom went silent as the video played on the large screen. The jury leaned forward, the audience froze. The footage showed Monica's calm demeanor, her clear question, "Am I being detained?" and the office's aggressive escalation without cause. It showed Clark's mocking gestures, Reynolds's threats, and the total absence of anything resembling contraband or suspicious behavior. The officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their faces pale as their own lies began to unravel in front of everyone. But Jonathan wasn't finished. He played the body cam footage next, where Reynolds's voice was caught saying, "We don't need proof when people like her always slip up." The courtroom gasped, a ripple of outrage spreading through the crowd. The phrase, "people like her," hung in the air like a thundercloud, exposing not just bias but intent. The judge banged his gavel for silence, but the damage was done. The jury's faces hardened, their eyes filled with disbelief and anger at the blatant injustice. Then, Jonathan delivered the final blow. He approached Monica and asked her calmly, "Ms. Carter, could you please state your profession for the record?" For the first time, Monica spoke, her voice steady and clear. "I am a field agent with the Central Intelligence Agency." Gasps erupted across the courtroom, the officer's jaws dropped, and even the judge's pen slipped from his hand. Monica continued, "For over a decade, I have served this country in intelligence operations overseas and domestically, protecting national security. I was profiled, arrested, and accused without evidence, simply because of how I look." What these officers didn't realize was that every move they made was not only unlawful, it was being recorded, and those recordings prove the truth. The silence that followed was deafening. The officers who had once looked so untouchable now sat frozen, their reputations crumbling in real time. The jury glanced at each other, their expressions fierce, as though justice itself had been woken from a long slumber. The judge called for a recess, his face tight with unease, knowing this case had just shifted from a small-town hearing to a national spectacle. Outside the courthouse, the press swarmed, shouting Monica's name, while across the country, news outlets began to broadcast the story of the CIA agent wrongfully arrested.
What began as a few small repair jobs slowly grew into something bigger than Daniel ever imagined. Within months, word of his reliability and kindness spread across the neighborhood. People didn't just hire him because he could fix things, they trusted him because he showed up on time, charged fairly, and treated every home like it was his own. Soon, he wasn't just the local handyman, he was becoming the go-to problem solver for families all around town. His weekends were fully booked, and eventually, he had to reduce his hours at the hardware store to keep up with the demand. For the first time since his wife's passing, Daniel could breathe a little easier. There was food in the fridge, Emily's clothes were new instead of secondhand, and the overdue bills that once haunted him were slowly disappearing one by one. But beyond the money, there was something far greater growing inside him, pride. Pride in the life he was building, pride in the father he was becoming, and pride in the example he was setting for his daughter. Emily noticed it too. She no longer asked why her dad was always tired. Instead, she boasted to her friends at school, "My daddy has his own business." That one sentence was enough to make Daniel's heart swell with joy. Every late night, every scraped hand, every moment of doubt, it was all worth it. His daughter could see him not as a broken man struggling to survive, but as a strong father who refused to give up. And that, to Daniel, was the greatest success of all. But life still had more lessons to teach him. With growth came new challenges, balancing multiple jobs, handling customer expectations, learning about invoices and taxes, and figuring out how to expand without losing the personal touch that had made him special. There were nights when the paperwork piled up, when exhaustion tempted him to quit, when fear whispered that it was all too much. But every time doubt crept in, he remembered the promise he made to Emily and to himself. He wasn't just building a business, he was building a future. Slowly, Daniel began to dream bigger. He created a small logo for his repair service, ordered business cards, and even started a simple social media page to share his work. To his surprise, the online world opened doors he never expected. Neighbors tagged him in posts, friends shared his page, and new customers began calling from areas he had never worked in before. Each message, each job, each word-of-mouth referral felt like confirmation that he was on the right path. Soon, he wasn't just fixing leaky faucets and broken chairs, he was renovating kitchens, repairing roofs, and taking on projects that truly showcased his skill. Every success built his confidence, and every setback taught him resilience. Daniel was no longer living day to day, he was laying the foundation for something lasting. Through it all, Emily remained his biggest cheerleader. On the nights when he worked late, she would draw pictures of him holding tools, writing, "Best Daddy in the World," across the page. He kept those drawings pinned above his desk as a reminder of why he worked so hard. And whenever exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, he would glance at those crayon-colored reminders and push forward. Daniel's life was far from perfect, but compared to the man who once sat defeated at his kitchen table, he was unrecognizable. He had risen, not just in financial stability, but in spirit, in hope, and in purpose. What was once just survival had become growth. And as his small business continued to blossom, Daniel began to believe that maybe, just maybe, the life he once thought impossible was finally within reach. This was not the end of his journey, but the beginning of a brighter chapter, one filled with possibility, hope, and the kind of success that comes not from luck, but from relentless love and determination. Years had passed since the night Daniel sat at his kitchen table drowning in unpaid bills and despair. The man who once questioned whether he could keep a roof over his daughter's head was now walking through the doors of his very own workshop, proudly displaying the sign that read, "Bright Fix Solutions, repairs you can trust." The small side hustle that began with a few flyers and whispered referrals had blossomed into a thriving business. He now employed 3 workers, men who had also fallen on hard times and were grateful for the chance Daniel had given them. His calendar was filled with renovation projects, his phone rang with new opportunities, and his name had become synonymous with reliability and kindness. But more than the money, more than the growing reputation, what truly mattered was the life he had created for Emily. She was now a bright, confident young girl, her smile radiant and her laughter echoing through a home no longer shadowed by fear. She didn't just see her father as someone who worked hard, she saw him as her hero, a man who turned struggle into strength and pain into purpose. On the day of his workshop's grand opening, Daniel stood before a small crowd of family, neighbors, and customers who had supported him from the beginning. Emily clutched his hand tightly, her eyes shining with pride. As he looked around, Daniel felt tears well up, not of sorrow this time, but of gratitude. He thought back to the countless nights of doubt, the moments he wanted to give up, the weight of loneliness that nearly broke him. And yet, here he stood, proof that even in the darkest times, love can light the way. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't talk about profits or success. He simply said, "Everything I've built, everything you see here, is because of one reason, my daughter. She gave me the courage to fight when I had nothing left. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: no matter how hard life hits you, never stop fighting for the people you love. Because sometimes, the greatest success isn't measured in money, it's measured in the smiles you protect, the hope you carry, and the love that guides you through every storm." The crowd applauded, and Emily hugged him tightly, whispering, "I'm so proud of you, Daddy." At that moment, Daniel knew he had not only rebuilt his life, he had created a legacy of resilience and love that his daughter would carry forever. And now, dear viewer, as you sit with Daniel's journey in your heart, I want to leave you with this: if his story moved you, if it reminded you of the power of love, strength, and kindness, then don't just walk away, help us spread more of these stories. Please, like this video and subscribe to Threads of Kindness so together we can inspire countless others who may be standing at their own breaking point, waiting for hope to find them. Remember, every act of kindness, every story of resilience, creates a ripple that touches more lives than we can ever imagine. And just like Daniel, you too have the power to rise, to transform, and to succeed, not just for yourself, but for those you love.